Hey, what's up guys, Aarava here, and welcome back to a brand new video here today, and welcome to an F1 Testing 2019 Week 1 Tech Roundup here. So, in this video, we're going to be strictly looking at the aerodynamic tech on these cars and kind of going through the new parts that have been brought into certain teams, if the cars look different from their launch spec to what they actually ran this past week at the Circuit de Catalunya, and basically going through and just giving you a nice roundup of that. In terms of talking about the actual testing times and the team comparison, I'll be saving that for the podcast, because if you guys have been with me on my channel for a while, you'll know the Pit Lane podcast is a podcast I run, and it is launching again for the 2019 season later on this weekend, so I'll be saving all that actual detailed talk for that. We're purely just going to be looking at the cars themselves and looking at the tech there and pointing out the differences. So we're going to start off with probably one of the biggest kind of talking points of this week was the front wings and the difference of the front wings between every single team. Of course, this year for 2019, the regulations have simplified the front wings. No longer do you have any cascade elements on the very front, extra kind of flaps to kind of flow control and turn the air very actively around the front tires or to where they need to go to the inside face of the tires towards the bargeboard area, and instead all the teams are only allowed 5 flap elements on the front wing. You've got the main plane and then 4 more flaps added onto that, and the teams can obviously choose how they go about, presenting those flaps, but they're only allowed 5 maximum, and the end plate can only be a very simple shape of one piece on the end plate, a little bottom kind of curved floor essentially, but no other elements and winglets on the side of the end plate. But despite that, the F1 world in general, the paddock, was still quite surprised at the big differences and innovations between all the different teams. And so you've got kind of 3 different categories of how the teams have gone about front wings. You've kind of got the, I guess you could say, more conventional style of front wing, which is simply almost like last year, but removing the cascade elements, but pretty much having the same shape in a way, in a very generic kind of front wing shape, which is the kind of same figure that Mercedes, Red Bull, and Haas and Williams are in. Obviously, Williams launched a bit late, so they have a very simple front wing. I have a suspicion that Williams are very far behind in the development of their front wing. I think they're kind of just having a bit of a dummy one at testing. But definitely Mercedes, Red Bull, and Haas have committed early, at least right now in pre-season testing, to this style of front wing where the wing kind of, has a bit of a taper and a swoop on the inside face, and when it connects to the end plate on the outer edge, it is a very much high, very normal shaped front wing as the flaps kind of go up in ascending height order towards the front tire, and they're still trying to chuck some air around to the outside of the tire, but also at the same time trying to just produce some downforce outright at the very front of the car there, whilst also obviously with the curved nature of the inside face trying to curve and curl some vortices down towards the bargeboard area and the front suspension. But both Mercedes and, like I said, Red Bull and Haas have gone with that same kind of style. You can see maybe on the Red Bull, and kind of very typical Red Bull, they've gone for a bit more of a potentially higher downforce kind of configuration compared to Mercedes, where you can really see those last 2 flaps there when it connects to the end plate. You can see that really nice curve shape actually if you look at the end plate properly there, and that curve shape's trying to create some downforce outright on the front wing, and also still trying to maybe curl a little bit air to the outside, but they're doing a lot of more work on the inside face, and they've gone for a very different concept to other teams a la Ferrari and Alfa Romeo and Toro Rosso with a more extreme end. But Red Bull are going with that same sort of thing, as well as Haas. Although, to be fair, Haas have a bit more of a kind of 2 different array attachment of the flaps themselves, with this little divider and the adjustment on the kind of flap angle they've got. They kind of separated the 2 sections in a way, and they've got a very chunky, actually, 2 main plate. The main plate in the actual first flap is quite large, actually, in comparison to Mercedes and Red Bull. So a bit of a difference there compared to the 2, but all 3, and along with the Williams car, in the same sort of category of this. All 3 teams going with a very conventional kind of shape to that, and surprised the paddock and I guess the other teams, because the other extreme end, the very extreme end, is teams like Alfa Romeo, Ferrari, and Toro Rosso. So looking at the Toro Rosso wing, they've gone for the way the flaps attach to the end plate. They've really tried to taper and sucker them all in to pretty much the same height and very low down on the end plate, and they've gone higher on the outer, the kind of inner edge of the flap, if you will, to the kind of inside face. So the air is still creating So the front wing is still creating the usual vortices going down towards the bargeboard area of the car, but when it gets to the point of the front wing, which is in front of the front tire, it's very tricky to turn air around there, and very tricky to really even create so much outright downforce in that area of the car, because you have so much pressure being bled in from the pressure point at the very front of the tire, and then in itself, when you get towards moving to the back end of the car, so much turbulent air flying off the front tire. It's hard to really do a lot with that. Toro Rosso have really angled the wings really deep down to try and get some flat airflow. So the airflow is still just kind of coming in very straight in a way, and that's going to improve drivability because the air is not being forced to do anything fancy there. It is pretty much like that tire is rotating without a front wing there, near enough on this outside edge, and so drivability is somewhat improved. And the way they've also really aggressively curved out their end play, they're still also trying to get a little bit of turning force around the front tire because naturally a vortex forms on this outside tire, like I mentioned a lot of times on the car launches, and in previous years they've had that tunneling effect of trying to create that kind of turning away and getting more air turned around from the front, but they can't really do that now with this year's cars. They've tried a little bit with the angle of the end plate and the little kind of warping of the front wing, but more so they're kind of just getting the air straight onto the tire to improve the drivability. If we look onto the Ferrari, very similar sort of thing. They've really curved aggressively and are working the air very nicely on the inside face towards the bargeboard area, but on the outside where it meets the end plate, unlike the other teams, they've still got this curling motion where it goes upwards, but they've still kept it very, very straight. So Toro Rosso have gone a bit more extreme even than Ferrari, really. Now we come to Alfa Romeo, which is probably the most extreme way of doing this, really. So what they've done is they've separated into two kind of different sections now, this kind of adjustment they've got for this flap angle. And so you've got this very low, shallow part of the wing. It was even shallower on the shakedown, but it looks like Alfa Romeo kind of looked at the data and thought they maybe went a bit too aggressive with the shakedown version of the wing. So coming to Barcelona, they'd have a bit more of a kind of less aggressive version of this wing, but it's still the same kind of philosophy, essentially. You've got this really bent end plate, and you can see, compared to the Ferrari car, and a bit more like the Toro Rosso car, these kind of smaller, really deep, shallow wing flap winglets on the front wing are a little bit angled to try and get some turning force to get the air around that front tire, but like I said, at the same time, also a bit more straightened up compared to these other more aggressive kind of higher angle flaps, so trying to just keep the air a bit more straight flowing towards the tire. But Alfa Romeo, compared to the other two teams, Ferrari and Toro Rosso, are in this section of extreme wing designs. They're definitely still trying to go for a bit more turning force. You can see the kind of curvature in a way, very much when they connect to the end plate, that kind of curved shape, still trying to chuck some air to the outside, because obviously some turning is better than nothing, really, like I mentioned in my vlog of my kind of experience with the Alfa Romeo team when I went to testing on Monday. If you didn't see that, by the way, I do recommend you go check it out. But for the kind of rest of the wing, then they've got that more conventional. It's still trying to work the air, create a vortice as it flies off and spirals off towards the barge area. They've got this very chunky flap, so they've actually gone for 4 flaps on this main section. They've kind of connected 2 of them together to get this big chunky flap to try and jet air towards the way they needed to, above the suspension arms and towards the bargeboard and sidepod area. Right now, the paddock insiders are saying potentially, you know, is there a kind of scenario where Mercedes and Red Bull later on in the season, do they want to maybe go for the Ferrari and Alfa Romeo style wings? The only issue with something like that is that changes your entire philosophy of the entire car, really, because the front wing is the very first device that gets met by the air, and that is going to drive the entire philosophy of the car, basically down the side pods, the bargeboard area, the rear end of the car even. And so that's a big job, and insiders have said to the paddock that it would take probably 3 months, 4 months to really redesign everything to get a new wing in this style. So Red Bull for now are confident. They say that their numbers are good and they're still fine with their philosophy, so it's really more of just an intrigue of the difference of the way teams have gone about it. But a lot of people are saying the Ferrari and the Alfa Romeo do look very comfortable out there in terms of drivability, especially the Ferrari car. Vettel and Leclerc both said the car is very nice and easy to drive, and so that might pay dividends for them in terms of just around the season having a bit more of a good race car, a bit more of a drivable car. Mercedes and Red Bull still might be on peak performance there, but their car might be more on a knife edge maybe when it comes to the race, in terms of how drivable their car is, in terms of how the air is affected, in racing terms behind many cars, a lot of dirty air coming off the rear end of cars. So it's going to be intriguing to see how it goes about. And then you've got the kind of middle halfway house of the kind of in-between, the good kind of in-between, where you've got the McLarens, the Renaults, and the kind of Force Indias in the middle. As you can see here clearly with the oscillations of the flaps that Renault have got, they've got a very similar shape to kind of Mercedes and Red Bull in a way, but at the same time, they have flattened up these front 2 flaps above the main plane in a similar fashion to to what Ferrari have done, and they have got a bit of an angling to try and turn the air a little bit. So they're kind of going for a kind of calmer middle stage. And obviously all these teams are all kind of intertwining their designs with, like I said, the rest of the car. So it is kind of the happy medium that they're finding and the way they want to go about it. McLaren are definitely the team in the middle category that have done the most kind of fusion hybrid of the two, because they've got this kind of sectioned off area where clearly are very much more like the Mercedes and Red Bull car on the inner side of the flaps, but then this outer edge that you can see that kind of angling still as we go on. If you follow the mouse, kind of just going straight, and then it starts to curve off a little bit, trying to chuck some air still to this outside face of the tyre. So they've definitely gone for a happy medium, and they could, maybe they wanted to potentially go more extreme then when they get to Melbourne, or maybe, you know, you start the European season proper at Barcelona when they come back for the Spanish Grand Prix. They could kind of, you know, change the front wing essentially and go towards a Ferrari Alfa Romeo style, because they've kind of already got that happy medium. But Mercedes and Red Bull, because they've gone so extreme to a different version and different way of go about it, they're going to find it very tricky to maybe change the philosophy of the front wing. Racing Point, I kind of said Force India earlier, but it's always going to be tough to say not Force India because it's all the same thing. But Racing Point have gone for a kind of Ferrari style in the way that it angles out. The end plate very aggressively angles out, so they're still getting some turning there. But then the inside face, very much almost like Mercedes, just kind of straightened up and a bit more standardized in the way they've gone about it. So a lot of interesting ways, and actually a lot more intrigue in the front wings than everyone actually thought there would be, because everyone thought there would be one kind of unique, one kind of standard approach to it. But there's actually a lot of innovation going on this year, which is really nice to see. So now we're going to move on to just the more general tech breakdowns instead of the front wing, kind of looking at the rest of the car. So we're going to start off here with Toro Rosso here, a nice shot of Flovis paint over the car on the front suspension arms, trying to see where the airflow is going to there. And you can see the Flovis paint on the top of the chassis there from even the suspension arms itself. And that's why an S-duct on most cars is so important, trying to inject air through to try and keep the air as attached as they can to the top face there. But Toro Rosso, compared to their launch spec, the front wing, the aggressive front wing, was a lot more conservative on their launch, so that definitely is something that they kind of try to hide when they launch the car, as well as their kind of side pod end plate area. They've gone for the more kind of conventional, you know, when they launched they had one simple upright, but now at the Spanish testing week, they've actually gone for, you know, a bit more like, you know, most of the teams now, with the kind of one upright connecting to a second piece that then goes in a bit of a dog leg kind of fashion. And you can see from this brilliant photo here of the Flovis over the side pod, you can really see that imaginary kind of, you know, invisible air moving across, and that's exactly what, you know, every time you hear it from Tech Analysis and myself in other videos about that Coke bottle shape, the air, you know, keeping it attached to the top face of the side pod as it swoops down all in a bit to go down towards the rear end of the car, right to the bottom where the diffuser works on. You can see literally the flow lines of the air coming down over the bodywork and swooping down into that Coke bottle shape that they create and keeping the airflow attached. So really nice illustration of what's going on there. You can see it comes off from the top face there, gets a kind of, you know, affected by the top kind of winglet coming across, and then stays attached on the top face. So, you know, really kind of more of a practical, real world, you know, vision of that air you can see without having to look at some CFD analysis simulations. Some more close-up shots of the Alfa Romeo racing car, the C38, and you can see that difference they've got to this year, where they've kind of tightened up the inlet compared to what they had last year. They've gone for a more of undercut, and like Red Bull, McLaren, and Renault have gone for, they've kind of used that side pod support structure as a bit of a way to attach their aerodynamic devices, then the uprights on the end plate, to try and deflect obviously air coming off the front tire, and also keeping all the air kind of channeled through towards the end of the car, with a nice little detailing of a flick winglet. So not exactly like Ferrari and Red Bull and McLaren have gone for. They've gone for a bit of a smaller array, but they've also got the wing mirror itself, you know, right there on purpose there to have a bit of vortex generation on the top of the side pod face. A nice back angle shot of the Ferrari car shows you very much like a Mercedes and Williams style cooling slot built into where the halo connects into the chassis, and they can actually adjust that to how much cooling they want to get. And also a very nice look at this very intricate array of winglets at the very front of the side pod face. You can see how this droops in and actively is chucking air into that side pod face, and then letting the wing mirror do all the kind of vortex generation on the very top of the side pod. Really, really beautiful car, really, the Ferrari. You can see the kind of matte finish, but aerodynamically speaking, it's just so nice to look at because it's so intricately done on the side pod area. Again, speaking about intricate. Ferrari then came to Barcelona with the proper array of cuts in their rear wing from that kind of bend face. Obviously, the Ferrari copied that off McLaren last year, and they kind of developed it a bit more, and they've got 3 upwash streaks trying to chuck air upwards and create that upwash effect on the rear end to create a kind of net downforce sucking area on the entire rear end with the kind of diffuser working in tandem, and then the usual very aggressive streaks bleeding air down towards the diffuser. That's obviously just a kind of evolution from last year, but a very intricate, like I said, and beautiful rear end as you were on the Ferrari car. Speaking about Williams, we haven't talked a lot about Williams because obviously they launched their car very late, so that was very unfortunate for them, but very simple rear wing, you know, no cuts in that kind of bend. They've gone for a small little straightening up fin on the rear end to try and straighten up some air as it goes through to the rear end and try and straighten up as it goes to the underside of the rear wing. But, you know, clearly there is a lot of catch-up work for Williams to do, and I don't think they'll be making... They have clearly made a bit of a step because the entire side pod area is a lot more sleeker and suckered in compared to last year, but I still don't think they're going to make a huge jump up to from they were, honestly, and they've got a long road ahead this season, I think. Showing off some nice detailing of the bargeboard area of Williams, so they have got a bit more of a difference and a bit more evolution of what they had last year of the low-slung end plates to the side pod. Obviously, the regulations don't allow them to have bodywork in this area of the car, so that's why it's kind of almost like it's being cropped off and cut, but this entire bargeboard area is pretty much almost like what they had last year at the very end of the year. Maybe a little bit of a difference, but not too much, really, and so they still have a long way to go to kind of catch up, clearly, when you just, you know, directly compare it to a team like Renault, if we will. And quickly having a look at the simple, very, very simple Williams front wing. I suspect, well, for their sake, I hope this is not the spec they turn up to at Australia, because it pretty much is the simplest wing on the grid. Very much a conventional, what does a 2019 wing look like? You would kind of just go for that as a generic shape. Moving on to Renault, compared to their launch spec, the bargeboard area did get very exponentially more intricate and detailed, really, so they were hiding stuff from their launch renders. The top wing, a la Red Bull style, stays through with a very small inlet, but the entire kind of end plate arrangement is very much almost copying the style of Mercedes and Red Bull, with the kind of 4 different elements kind of chucking the air, getting slot gaps through, jetting the air through and accelerating as it goes to the rear end of the car, and then the usual kind of approach of many slot gaps, but a lot more intricate than they had at the launch. And the same goes for their rear wing. At launch, they had a very flat and very simple rear wing, like we expected. They have eventually kind of launched properly at Spain with a very twisted and contorted and cut out rear wing, allowing air to pass through, cutting the drag in, that efficiency at the rear end. At the same time, also, they're another team that have gone for a T-wing on the very end of the car, just ahead of the actual mounting points where their rear wing attaches to the floor, and just before the exhaust, they've got that T-wing curved downwards. Talking about Rich Energy Haas, now at the launch, a lot of people were skeptical of what was the real point of doing much analysis of the renders that Haas had, but actually, lo and behold, the car they turned up with was pretty much the exact same car they had at their launch for the renders. So obviously, the car they launched with physically at their launch was obviously a bodge job car, but the renders, like I said in the video when the car launched, was going to be an indication of their car, and it really was. So a lot of people were very skeptical and kind of saying there was no point analysing that car of the renders, but actually, lo and behold, there was, because it really was the car they're going to turn up with. I haven't talked too much about Racing Point. Obviously, their livery launch was not a car launch, so we only saw their car for the very first time on Monday when testing actually began. So this is your first look, really, I guess, on my channel, per se, of the new Racing Point car. Very much an evolution of last year's chassis. They've admitted it pretty much is last year's chassis, kind of merging into what they wanted for 2019. But they've got some nice intricacies. They actually turned up on the last day of testing, I believe, day 4, with a new floor arrangement and slot gaps and uprights there. It's trying to do some more work in the floor area, which is kind of nice. An evolution of last year, cutting out what they had, or what they're not allowed this year on this area of the barge wall there. They've gone for the, not what most teams have gone for, the 2-pronged attachment of the wing mirrors. They've gone for what they pretty much had last year. They do have a very nice Red Bull style winglet, though, coming across. So a lot of teams have copied that Red Bull wing across the top face of the bargeboard area and the side pod. And the wing itself, obviously, like I mentioned, is kind of halfway house, kind of good medium between the 2 different ways to go about a front wing. And finally, look at Mercedes here, just some nice different angle shots of their kind of intricacies of the side pod element there. You can see the clear difference compared to teams Red Bull, McLaren, Renault, all the teams that have gone for this very tighter inlet and the kind of bigger wing across the top. Mercedes have kept their kind of philosophy of this kind of smaller overarching wing connecting to a much larger upright, and that's still quite, circular, roundish kind of inlet for the kind of side pod itself. But I will say, Mercedes this year have really suckered in their side pods. It's very clear from this angle that really nice Coke bottle shape, and they've turned up to testing with a much more intricate floor. You can see how many squirt slot gaps they've got ahead of that rear tire, trying to squirt air towards that inside face between the rear tire. They have got some really nice detail on the rear end there, but Mercedes for now haven't really concentrated on lap times themselves. And last year you got to remember, Mercedes did sandbag a lot and turned up to Australia and got poles. So we can't really read too much into what they've done so far in testing. But there have been a few murmurs about Mercedes, being a little bit, they have kind of admitted that they're intrigued by the Ferrari concept of front wing compared to their front wing. And Toto Wolff has said some stuff in some German interviews about, looking into, that they admitted that they still have to look into and research the entire way to go about it. So, but that's one thing. Mercedes are always good at catching up if they are behind it first. And I've not shown much of McLaren. That's because their car very much was what they launched with. What they showed at launch was, no hiding, no smoke and mirrors. That was the car they turned up to with testing, pretty much. Nothing new, really, actually, to speak about on the car. So that's been the tech roundup of the week 1 of testing. I'll be doing another roundup for week number 2. But guys, if you did enjoy the video and found it interesting and informative, then be sure to hit that like button. Let me know your thought in the comments below. If you are new around here, to subscribe for weekly full-on content, every hour, 100 a day. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.